Next up, we're excited to welcome Jason Brown, Vice President of Marketing for Champ Sports and Eastbay. Jason began his career over 15 years ago, holding leadership roles at Fox Sports, NBC Sports, and PepsiCo, where he earned the Charles Professor X Xavier Collaboration Award. Jason is on a mission to inspire and empower youth culture. Welcome, Jason.
Thanks, guys. How are you?
Jason, it's good to see you, my man.
You as well, man. How are you?
I'm well. I'm really glad you're on the show because I think you'll bring some really fun insights here. Right off the bat, let's get right into it. Where is the consumer's attention? How do you quantify that in your mind, and what's the answer?
Well, I think you heard it just now. Our mission at Foot Locker is to inspire and empower youth culture. And given that we're predominantly focused on Gen Z, I think what's transpired the past 6 to 8 months has really been exacerbated what we already know. Consumers want brands that align philosophically with their value system, and they want you to take a stand somewhere, wherever that is. And we found numerous ways to engage, and that could be the environment, that could be encouraging civic participation. There's numerous ways in which you can do that, and I think they want to see that even more than they did before, just given the volatility that we're experiencing right now. I think that would definitely be my biggest takeaway over the past 6 months during this COVID time period.
And what about from so that macro? What about in the trenches? One thing I've always liked when we've interacted is we've always talked in our quick passes and events, NBA All-Star, CS. It always feels like a contemporary conversation, which usually leads to of the moment. You know, so for this, I think will help so many because we have a big breadth of entrepreneurs, kids, executives, board members, Fortune 500. How important for a brand and a slew of companies that you're overseeing is TikTok right this second? Like just right to the punchline, like thinking about your business, how important is that platform?
It's definitely important. And I would say that we definitely haven't cracked the code yet, but it's definitely one that do
you feel it? Do you feel like, when I hear you say that, I'm sorry to jump in, but do you feel like, shit, we just really need to win on this platform pretty soon because the longer we go, somebody else is going to take that heat?
No, absolutely. And I think there's also the fine line of making sure that you're doing it the right way. I mean, you think about when people are just buying followers and just trying to sponsor anyone they could without being meaningful. And I know just even to your previous conversation about influencers, that's something that we use throughout all social platforms. But one of the things that I try to evangelize with my team is creating partnerships with influencers, not just people to repost something so we can count impressions at the end of a recap. You know, it has to be meaningful and has to be purposeful. So when you think about TikTok and what we're trying to accomplish there, given that TikTok is really predicated on music and dance, we're primarily focused on sports. So how do we stay true to who we are and then make that relevant to TikTok and that audience? Because I mean, when you think about athletes in the end zone when they score a touchdown, think about the handshakes that guys give when they're going into the basketball court. That's something that's relevant to TikTok. How do you take that choreography and apply it to TikTok in a meaningful way where it's still true to us, still true to sports, and relevant to that audience?
I think that is an extremely, extremely good point. Do you think, though, in broader terms, I think one thing that people do in these moments is get a little narrow when the mass of it is just underpriced attention. The biggest thing I've learned in the last 15 years in watching, you know, from MySpaces come up to where we are right now on TikTok is at times we overthink things. Sometimes just the sheer youth is so there that it's just a game of like micro to macro. Like to me, 8,000x. If I buy your company tomorrow, I'm like, we're doing 18,000 things on that platform ASAP because almost everything's working out because the underpriced nature of the ad product, the influencers on it, like the whole thing feels macro underpriced. And I do think at times, I've become educated on why companies have to think these things through, which is just politics and internal bullshit. But like the reality is the net is underpriced. Thoughts on that?
So I do agree with some of those things that you were just saying, but I think what you got to take into consideration, I'll give you a really good example.
Please.
This was the first time in history where we had to close our entire fleet of stores during COVID, right? So then depending upon what was going on in the States, certain stores were opening before others. And then obviously people also have a different level of comfort as it relates to going into a store, even though we try to follow all guidelines, make people as comfortable as possible. Snapchat, we worked with them and we were the first retail brand to take advantage of the sneaker AR augmented reality try on, right? So back to school is very different this year. This was a back to school like we've never seen. So you're right. I could take all my money and put it into TikTok and try to create all this awareness, but why not focus on my back to school bets, the priorities that we're trying to bring to life, and allow the kid who may or may not be able to go to the store, who's on Snapchat, to be able to try on a shoe virtually and purchase it. So I think those are the kind of things you got to take into consideration. You can't just chase the cool kids if that doesn't necessarily solve for what you're trying to accomplish. And with what Snapchat recently did in terms of that program and execution, I looked at that as a win.
Jason, on that note, because I couldn't agree more with that last part, and you, being at PepsiCo, and I know a lot about the way that company scores, or at least historically has, why, to your point, you basically just said, hey, we need to do the thing that the business needs. Why do all the big companies you work for score on media metrics, not business results?
It's a combination of both. Those media metrics definitely are taken into consideration, but you have to look at media in isolation in the sense of making sure that your dollars are working. I agree that it's one of those processes that could definitely get better and be a bit more integrated.
You think? I mean, let's call a spade a spade. Let's educate some kids here as they're going into the industry. Like, you know, the holding company, media company is incentivized against a certain cost, and thus that inventory gets chosen. Or an internal MMM is built that justifies television spend but doesn't justify Facebook spend. Thus, nobody spends on Facebook in 2013 or 11 when it's the #1 platform on earth. I mean, there's a big disconnect. You're now in retail, thank God, so you're getting clean returns information on sales, but like CPG land is a disaster.
It's hard. It's a challenging business. It's a challenging business, especially when you think about the volume, especially on a global level. It's really hard to correlate that together. So I think I was actually reading an article about Elon Musk and Steve Jobs. I think they both took the same approach in terms of making sure that they broke down as many silos so that everyone had the same goal, right? So if I'm in the media department, I'm gonna make sure that the impressions, the engagement, the ROI as it relates to media is through the roof. And unfortunately, that might not put me in a position to where I should be as commercially minded as I should. And I think as you start to see more integration at those companies with more of that common goal, you'll see that benefit as it relates to both having a bit more parity.
I think you're very versed in the current state of humans. How about you yourself? JB's personal attention graph these days. What is winning in your world? Which show on OTT? Which artist? Which app? What have you, and give me a little storytelling on something that's evolved. Like, oh, I wasn't into podcasts before COVID. Now, because I work out in my home gym, I am. Or I used to just have Netflix, but now I have Hulu and Roku, or I downloaded TikTok and I'm about it now. Like, what's evolved, increased or decreased in your actual media consumptions?
I would say that I've definitely gotten more into audiobooks. I was always into podcasts. I guess we could laugh at this one, but when Quibi launched, I did want to see the Clippers documentary. So
yes,
I joined Quibi for a week so I could watch that one. Obviously bad timing in terms of when and where and how.
How was it?
What do you say?
How was it? I didn't see any feedback on it. How was
it? That documentary was great. You had to obviously restart it for the 7 episodes. That was kind of annoying, but the content itself was great. But that's the biggest change as it relates to platforms. But I think one of the things I'd want to focus on is a moment. And I think one of the best moments we had, especially as me being a sports fan, sneaker fan, etc., was what we had with The Last Dance.
Of course.
I think when you take into consideration how ESPN was able to pull that off, and when you think of how appointment television viewing does not exist today, in comparison to how it was in the past, unless it is live sports, I think the way that galvanized the country, even non-sports fans, was amazing and shows how powerful content and great storytelling can be.
Jason, I really appreciate your time. I wish you continued success. Thanks for being part of this show.
Thank you, man.